In this video, I'm showing you how I painted the Heart Flame Diki Spirit. This is where I left off. I sculpted the feet directly onto the armature, so I have to paint them here. And then here's all the parts I'm going to be painting separately. I start with the head, and I use an ultramarine blue as the base. I want this to be like a purpley color, so a kind of warm blue as a base is a good starter. And I just paint a full coat and let that dry. Then I go on for a second coat. I added a tiny bit of white, and I keep adding a little bit more white into the blue to make it more opaque. And then I layer it up. I want it to be a little lighter on the highlight areas and darker in the divots. So I'm adding some dark color around the nose and eyes. I'm mixing the blue into a little bit lighter purpley color, and then I'm adding it to the nose and the parts of the face that come forward. Then I keep just adding white into that mix and dry brushing on top until it gets almost white. I'm actually getting it really white because I'm going to be using these fluorescent paints that are very transparent and they won't show up without a white base. So I'm getting a pretty strong white highlight at the top here, so those fluorescents will show up. I mix the blue and the pink together to get a kind of purpley fluorescent color. Then I put a light coat on the top, and I put some deep pinks in the crevices. Now I'm adding that fluorescent blue back in and combining it with that pink in the crevices, and I'm adding some fluorescent pink along the eyes. I defined that eyebrow with some darker color and some pinks, and I'm just kind of layering up to see what I like. I add white to the eyebrows so I can add more fluorescence on top of that. And then some blues. The fluorescents don't show up super vivid, but you can see that they kind of tint the white. Now I'm using some purple Pearl X pigment to put some shimmer on the highlights. I place it on the blue-purple parts. Then I paint black along the line of the mouth and I blend it in. And then I add a little bit of reddish pink to the edges here and black or deep blue to the eye. I add a tiny gold shimmer to the tear duct. And then I paint white around the iris. I paint it white so all the color will show up on top of it. I paint some white under the chin because I want this to blend into the yellow fur I'm going to be using. And I want it to kind of look like a flame, so I start experimenting with the shape. And while that's drying, I add the tear ducts to the middle eye, and then I start adding my colors. I use a little bit of pink in the pupil, and then yellow, and I blend it together with orange, and then a little white at the bottom. Then I add some yellow to the flame underneath, and I define the edges of the shape with black. And to blend that transition, I use some orange and red to make it look like an actual flame. Once that's dry, the paint job is done on the face, and I can move on to my hands. I start with that base coat of ultramarine blue, and I really rub it in at the ball joint because it's going to be scraping against the wrist a lot whenever it's moving. It always scratches off a little anyway, so I always touch it up whenever I'm done. Then I add some white and a transparent blue layer over that white, so you have a nice dark blue to light blue transition. And I add some of my transparent fluorescent blue on top of that. Then I start adding some white in the palm of the hand. This is going to be the base layer for some other bright fluorescent fire colors. Once that's dry, I add my orange. And then to blend the edges, I add some red. And you can see it's starting to look way more fire-like. I add a little bit of that fluorescent pink to the top and a little more yellow to the bottom. And then I dry brush some light on top of the hand. Next, I move on to the arm. And I do a base layer of ultramarine. I layer up a few coats until it's solid. And I dry brush a little bit of light on top. Then I add some shimmery pink to the base. And some fluorescent over the top of that. Then I move on to my paws, and I do much the same thing. Ultramarine mixed with a little white, bunch of different coats so it's one solid color. And then I add a little bit of pink at the bottom. I layer it up until it gets more vivid. Then I add my fluorescent pink on top of that. And fluorescent blue on the top. Then I use a really bright fluorescent pink for the toe pads. And then I layer red on top. I'm trying to see what color I like here. And I blend the edges with some darker blue. I didn't like that, so I added some white on top because I want that fluorescent to pop. Then I dry brush some light blue onto the toes so they stand out a little bit. And I didn't get this on film, but I painted fluorescent over the white and then a transparent deep pink over that. Then I add my Pearl X pigments for the shimmer, and especially on the toe pads. And then the feet are done. For the ears, I start with a black base coat. Once that's dry, I add a light blue on top. And I layer it up until the coats are even. Then I add some deep pink around the edges of the ear. These little details on the ear are the most satisfying. Next, I add white into the center of the ear and on the little pocket on the edge. And I start with some vivid red, and I blend it along the edges. I really like how that's popping against the blue. Then I add some orange and yellow in the middle, so it looks more flame-like. And pink. And I touch up my edges. And then I add a little dry brush black tip and fade it out. Then my ears are done. I spray everything with Mr. Super Clear Flat Spray. And this is the end result whenever it's sprayed. You can see how all the colors evened out a lot. Any paints that don't really match and sheen will all be flattened under the spray, and it looks really nice. Next, I add a little bit of gloss on the eye of the Diki spirit. I don't forget the tear ducts. I go along the closed eyes and the nose and the mouth as well. And there's the final product. I really love how these colors came out. Here's the paws with the head. And you can see the hands when they're put together with elastic. And put on the armature. And then these are the ears when it was fully finished. Thank you for watching.